Kia ora, welcome to Connect with Community Waikato on Free FM 89.0. You're listening to Roseanne Murray, and I have with me in the studio today our Chief Executive, Holly Snape. Welcome, Holly.
Thank you for inviting me. Well, I kind of invited myself to be this part of the show today, didn't I?
You did indeed, yeah, and we thought it was a great opportunity for us to be on the opposite side of the desk this time round.
Yeah.
We thought we'd have a good chat around the State of the Nation 2025 report that's just come out from the Salvation Army, and I believe it's the 18th version.
Yeah, so Salvation Army obviously been doing this a long time, 18 years, and this is a great way to get a snapshot of what is happening for people and communities across Aotearoa, New Zealand. It's really hard for our sector, I think, to... It's expensive to do research, so we often don't have access to good research. So this report is one of the very few that come out that is very specifically about people in our communities, looking at some of those social indicators that many community organisations also use to be able to alleviate poverty and alleviate discomfort and, you know, all of those things. So it's a great research report. It's very well researched. They use excellent data. They draw it from multiple sources, including the government, where they OIA for very specific areas of information, particularly around crime statistics. So they have an absolute wealth of data, and then they analyse that with that social lens, you know, with that community lens, and really thinking about what does this mean for communities and for people living in Aotearoa, New Zealand.
All right, sounds like a great sort of resource, as you say, for especially the community sector to have, and all the various agencies out there.
And of course, they use it as well to advocate with the government around policies, and many, we all can. You know, that's part of the beauty of having a document like this, is it's a great opportunity to go to government and say the numbers are very clear. You know, we've got a government at the moment that talks a lot about evidence and doing things based on evidence. Well, you know, this is a perfect source of information to be able to tell our stories and to demonstrate why it is that we need particular support in areas to be able to do the best we can for our communities.
Right. And so obviously the social policy analysts that actually pulled this report together, they're doing a bit of a roadshow around Aotearoa at the moment. Yeah, and
we're really lucky. They do come to Kirikiriroa Hamilton each time, and I try to make every one of those. They're always sober reading. Like, I don't think we're surprised by that. We work in the community sector. We know, we see the people who are struggling, so we know it exists. So sober reading, but also really, really wonderful opportunity you do see where the wins are. So this report also talks about where we've seen improvements. That's always heartening. But also you see lots of people in the room who are, you know, usually out there doing the hard mahi, who you don't have as much of an opportunity to connect with, and we're all there for the same reasons, and it is a fantastic opportunity to connect as well. And to talk a little bit, you know, we mingle afterwards over some snacks. I had mini pies, one of my favourites. And then we talk about, you know, what are the things we could do together, you know, to shift the dial with some of this stuff? How systemically can we contribute to change, you know, and what would be the things that we could do that we can affect change with, that would genuinely have a great impact for the communities we serve.
So that whole collaboration, you know, sort of that unity,
that
power
collegiality, yeah, absolutely, and that collective impact conversation.
Yeah. And I think picking up on what you've just said about, you know, how we can potentially influence the system, and now that we do have that evidence, you know, how can we all work together to be able to get that story across and look at, you know, what initiatives can actually be put in place and actually funded to actually happen.
Yeah, definitely.
Indeed. So there was sort of three key themes, I think, that they were focusing on around that, the basics around, you know, your kai, you know, having a kaianga, and around whānau.
Yes.
Maybe you can share some key points around those with us.
Yeah, we'll start with food, because food's something that we've been very heavily involved with. You know, as Community Waikato, we were involved in establishing the Kai Collective originally for the area, just to help can make connections across those food providers so that we could have some greater insights into what's happening thematically in that space. So Kai is really interesting. There is an absolute increase in need in Kai. I believe it was a 40% increase over the greater demand of 2020. So basically, during COVID, we saw a spike in demand. That spike hasn't reduced, and in fact, it has increased. There are lots of different analyses for this. I personally have always felt there has been greater Kai need for food than we have seen through the numbers in our food banks. Unfortunately, our food banks and various other places that provide food, many of them have quite strict criteria around access. And so that means not everyone has the ability or the I was going to say the right, that feels really terrible, but I suppose it is, to access food through some of those means. Kaivolution rescue food is different. That is freely available to anyone who wants it. So I think that people during COVID learned about how they could access food when they were in need. So we saw more people coming, A, because there was more need, and B, because people who were in need before realised how to access food. So those two things happened. Since COVID, we've also seen significant increases in food costs, right? Totally. It's just been year on year on year, and we're seeing, the increased cost of living. Wages aren't keeping up, so people are certainly squeezed with their disposable income, and that has had an impact on people's ability to be able to pay for food. So that hasn't reduced. In fact, that has increased. Yep. The context around this, which makes it really challenging for us, is that the last government put a significant amount of money into food during that COVID period to be able to address that additional pressure and pain that people were feeling around, food poverty, essentially. So that is always intended to have tailed off in the next few years, and so that has now been reduced, and it will be stopped. I think this year, so it's relatively soon. So the additional funding that had gone into food for the food bank community and the food providers around the country, that additional money is stopping soon, but we know that there's an increased need, and that need is not going away. The increased need in Hamilton is 2.5 times pre-COVID numbers.
I know you mentioned that in our team meeting earlier, and I was just astounded by that figure.
Yeah, it's frightening.
Very frightening.
Yeah, because people are going without food, and it's also there's a very strong ethnic over-representation as well, where particularly Pacifica, are well overrepresented in those numbers. Māori are overrepresented in those numbers. So we know specific communities are suffering even more at an even greater level than the rest of our communities. And that's extremely problematic.
Yeah, just so is, indeed. When I was having a quick read through the report earlier, and I know we're going to talk about the other two key themes coming up, but this statement that I read, just really resonated with me, was around when people have food security and they have a warm, dry, affordable home, then they have that basis for nurturing a healthy family and positive relationships. And that is just so true, isn't it?
Oh, look, if anyone has ever been hangry, it's actually hard to make good decisions and feel loving and patient and all of those things when you are hungry.
I know what that's like without having breakfast sometimes. You're in a hurry and,
Exactly. And so, It is so much more important than I think we even realise. We know it's also important for learning, in order to fuel the brain to be able to learn for kids going to school. That's quite critical. But even in our social relationships, food is critical to keep us in a space where we're actually able to engage effectively with the people around us, to maintain healthy relationships.
And are vital when it comes to like the tikanga.
That's right, breaking bread together. Yeah.
Very much so. And just probably talking about, kids, going to school without food, and obviously the fiasco these days with the lunch in schools program.
Yeah. So apparently still experiencing teething problems.
Yeah.
And I was reading an article today about a principal who's saying they see themselves as just withdrawing from this program because, they're left, kids aren't liking the food. They're not eating the food. And so it rots. And of course, then you have populations of people saying, well, if they were hungry, they'd eat it.
But my statement back to them would be, would you eat it yourself?
Yeah.
And would the politicians actually eat it themselves? And who realistically can make a decent meal for $3 a day or whatever it is?
Yeah.
Anyway, that can be another time to go through that.
Another time.
Yeah. So around... Kaianga, homes,
housing. So, one of the good news stories was the significant decrease in the number of people in emergency housing. And emergency housing has been a really big issue for many communities. Aotearoa community had huge problems with the emergency housing and the impact that that's had on their tourism, because they haven't had the availability of those rooms for tourists. So obviously a huge impact. We know there have been significant social issues related to emergency housing. It's not, what's the word? People can't, with emergency housing, you are not confident that you've got a place to sleep in next week. It's really unsettling, right? And that has a huge impact, especially if you've got kids. They're tough environments to be in. So seeing such a big fall from emergency housing is really positive, and there's been an increase in transitional housing. So that's getting people into a bit of a more stable solution. It's not the long-term solution. Again, it's intended to be relatively short-term, but then people transition from then into either public housing or social housing or, into their long-term or permanent solution after that. So that's really good. The last government, we know, put a lot of investment into building public housing. The community sector as well has done a lot of that work too. Essentially, in the last 18 months, those houses have started coming on board. So they've been finalised, they're up and ready, they're ready to go, they've been populated. So I think that's where we're seeing that drop off. So that's fantastic. The numbers, though, still needed, significant. 4,000 houses, I think, required to deal with just, I think, the emergency housing issue.
And I think, you can walk along any main street of any town or city within Aotearoa and you're still going to see a lot of homeless people out there.
Look, exactly. And I think that was the other thing that the researchers talked about. In terms of this big drop-off of emergency housing, they talked about the government were not able to tell where all of those people had gone. And there is a belief that there is still quite a portion of those people who went into back into homelessness or home insecurity, couch surfing, living in cars and things like that. So the fact that they have left emergency housing, that might not have been their choice either. That is not what this graph is telling us, that these people chose to leave and went into a better place.
Yep.
So all it's telling us is there has been a reduction. And I think many of our community workers working in the space of homelessness and social housing will have perhaps some more detail into what that actually looks like from a grassroots perspective.
All right. I think this is probably a good time for us maybe to take a little break so that you can give your voice a break, and we'll just listen to a little bit of music, and then we'll come back, and if there's anything else we'll talk about around the housing.
We'll go into rental affordability.
That sounds really good. And welcome back to Connect with Community Waikato on Free FM 89.0. You're listening to Roseanne Murray and Holly Snape, both from Community Waikato. And we've been talking about the State of the Nation 2025 report that the Salvation Army have just produced, and there's a roadshow going around Aotearoa at the moment. So, Holly, prior to the music break, we spoke about, the overall concept of the report and how it's going to be able to provide so much more evidence for organisations, but also too, just really specifically looking at Kai and around Kaianga, and then the other key theme is around whānau. And there was a couple of key points that you might like to share with us on that.
Well, we're going to finish off the housing one, and that was around rental affordability worsening for those renting, particularly in the private sector. So, that market has been really, really tough for people with rents in lower income communities. They are increasing significantly faster than inflation and certainly faster than the average wage growth over the past decade. So that it has a real impact on people's disposable incomes. So whānau and family were the other category that was a central theme for this particular one. It's always, it's a bit sad. There were some sad numbers around kids being, so there's an increase in the number of children who are the victims of a violent crime by an adult. It's quite scary when you hear that kind of language, children being, physically harmed by an adult. So that number has been increasing, particularly the number of children admitted to hospital with injuries because of an assault or abuse or neglect. And there was a sharp rise in 2004.
2024?
2024. I remember 2004, Roseanne.
So do I. Yeah. Didn't feel like that long ago, did it?
No, it really doesn't. It feels like yesterday. That is really quite sad. And, we know that violence and neglect and abuse, so often is connected to poverty, to not having access to kai, to insecure housing. Like all of those contributors impact a person's ability to be able to cope, right? And their strategies for how to be able to interact within, that family setting. So it is really, we need to address all of these things right in order to be able to strengthen the family.
Oh, totally. And I know we were talking about it with our team, and one of our colleagues, was mentioning about the absenteeism from school, and we had two family members, two young children, and they were virtually taking alternative days to go to school. Yeah, and it was because they could only afford one pair of shoes between them both. Yeah, so they were taking turns at who was wearing the shoes to be able to walk to school. Didn't have the luxury to either be given a ride or even catch the bus.
Yeah, I mean those are the sort of stories that we take for granted. If it's not a part of your world, it's very hard to see that this stuff actually happens and exists, and that's how people make decisions. Lots of kids have been held back from school because the family don't have food. Yep. And that's why they put food in schools, to address that very problem. And it is really quite critical, right?
Oh, so critical. We've talked about it, before about, if you don't have that food to nourish you, and that's sort of mentally and physically, how are you expected to sit in a classroom all day?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Interesting too, the number of people, or the number of like methamphetamine use, MDMA, ecstasy and cocaine all increasing. And again, there's been really good addiction research on addiction not being related to a problem with an individual necessarily, but as a symptom of the social conditions that people live in. And the worsening the social conditions and the worsening the gap, the inequity, the greater increase we see in activities of social harm. So that would be gambling as well. It's a really good example. And I think the hope that gambling can bring someone, but also the damage it does, long term for people. And the same with recreational drug use, and alcohol. Yeah, which I suppose we could call a recreational drug. Yeah.
Something along those lines.
Just a legal one.
And unfortunately, you've got people that will use it more than just on a recreational basis.
Yeah, absolutely. But let's add into this mix. So we've got, that increasing or decrease in disposable income, decreasing food security, decreasing housing security, decreasing job security. So we've got all of these things. And then we've got like a sudden rise in electronic gambling, things that you can do online in the safety and privacy of your own home. And it isn't monitored, right, in the same way that at least, no matter what people think of gaming machines, and trust me, I have some thoughts. No matter what you think of that, at least it's still within an establishment where there are eyes on people, engaging in that, and same through the casinos. Electronic gambling doesn't have that same monitoring and the same controls that can be put in place to intervene when it becomes evident that there is an issue. So, these are all the sort of the part of the context I think that we need to apply when we think about this report. And then we look across the sector and think about all the amazing things that our community groups are doing to be that fence at the top of the cliff sometimes and the ambulance at the bottom when that's what needs to be.
Yeah, and, you hear people at times saying, this is what government should be doing,
Yes.
And I sometimes think they need to get down into the coalface a lot more to actually be able to see what damage is being done out there and the harm for our people and then the amazing things that all of these community charitable groups are doing to try and lift up our whānau.
And they are doing amazing work as well. It's hard for us to shift the dial on systemic issues, but I tell you what, we're throwing starfish back in, if you know that story. And the individuals that these community organisations touch are certainly better off for that relationship.
They are indeed. Right, so we've got about 40 seconds to go, Holly. So any last
words are jump on the Salvation Army website, look up State of the Nation 2025. They've actually got a full report with all of the data in there. If you're interested in finding out a little bit more, that's the place to go, right?
All right. No, that's great to hear. So look, thank you, Holly, for coming along and sharing those key points from us. And I think a real big thank you to the Salvation Army for continuing to obviously fund for this amazing research
and
to
share it with everybody.
Yes.
For free.
Yes.
Unlike Stats New Zealand. Yay, Salvation Army, you're amazing.
Oh, look, they are indeed. And I think, big shout out to Paul Barber and Ana Ika, the social policy analysts who are leading up this project. So that's it. We've run out of time. So thank you, everyone. Ka kite, and we'll talk to you again.